and talking public theology with Dr. Craig Heilmann. Craig, kia ora. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you in this wonderful new year, Andrew.
Yeah, and hey, let's start with some definitions, because this is an area which you are, I suppose, leaning into in your current incarnation of yourself. Public theology, how would you define that, Craig?
For me, it's front-footing questions of, this is my definition. It's not the absolute definition. There are multiple definitions, but my definition, Andrew, is front-footing questions that relate to the gospel in the public square. So it's not apologetics. It's more about policy. It's more about prescription. It's more about what's going on in the public square. Particularly issues for me, the ones I'm interested in are the ones that impact how we witness the gospel. So in other words, positions that Christians might be forced into under pressure that are having a genuine impact on the gospel. One obvious example in recent times was COVID. It was very, very divisive for churches and impacted Christian witness and impacted our relationships. So that was relevant to the gospel, and we needed to think very clearly about it. So to me, that's what public theology at its best will do.
How we engage with issues that are important to everyday life. Are we actually answering the questions that people have, or have we got a different set of questions, I suppose? One of the big questions in many different parts of the world, it's certainly hitting the headlines in the United States at the moment, but it's also an issue, I know, where you're based in Australia and here in New Zealand as well, the issue of immigration. And, stepping into the public square, the Pope has got a view on Donald Trump's immigration policy, it seems, stepping into the piazza, perhaps, on this one.
He's definitely in the public square, absolutely.
Yeah. And what's the general story here? I mean, I suppose there's lots of Catholic adherents within the United States, but the Pope having an opinion on the immigration policies of the United States, is this somewhat unusual?
Well, I think it's okay that he's got an opinion about it. I think it's okay that he shares it. I think the problem is that it looks to some people anyway as representing the views of elite members of our society more than the average person who might suffer as a consequence of immigration. And this immigration issue, mate, is not a black and white issue for people. For the Pope, for example, most of the people that are coming into the US through the southern border or have done are going to be Catholics. Mm-hmm. So at one level, you can understand why he'd be defending those folks. He has every reason in the world to do so. Also, there is questions of humanity and human dignity. All of those things are right. The problem, I think, is that the Pope also gets pegged with this kind of global open borders thing and seems to be, there's a feeling that he's in the pocket of the people that hold those views. Those are the views of the elites in our societies, the rich and powerful. They're not necessarily the views of the average citizen who might like having borders, even though it causes endless grief for you and I when we travel and have to go back through the airport and all the rest of it. The truth is that borders are just part of the world we live in. There's a debate right now in the Western world. Do we get rid of borders altogether? Do we do like Europe and just create essentially a world without borders? And mass immigration has really been a piece of the argument. It's just been allowed to happen as if those borders don't exist. The southern border in the US was essentially obliterated. Trump has obviously responded to that, and now the Pope's responding to him. So that's really the lay of the land. What does the average person think? In my view, if you look at the voting trends, if you look at everything that's about to happen in the election here in Australia, you look at England, you look at America, I think the average person might have had enough and we've overcooked this thing.
I suppose it's all very well to have a political theory, but how does it affect the folks at home, the people that will vote one way or the other on this one? And certainly in the United States, people have made their opinions clear. There are people, even within immigrant communities, who are concerned about what is happening economically in the United States, who are concerned about whether or not there is enough resources to go round, and whether or not we should at least be asking some questions about who's in and who's out and who gets to decide.
Yeah, I think the African American community, to my mind, because they're mainly Democrat voters, and it's the Democrats that have pushed the open borders, I think they're the best litmus test of where things are at. And it seems like a lot of African American voters are really upset by, because they're directly impacted. Their communities are directly impacted. Money that might have been spent on their communities in the inner city in Chicago, for example, is now being spent on illegal immigration. So there's every reason in the world to be squabbling over scarce resources, scarce dollars. And if you're upsetting your own voters, there might be something wrong in what's going on. And so from my perspective, that's where it sits. And I do think our Western elites are going to have to take a different view. And clearly Trump is pushing that view. He sent Vance to Europe to address some of these issues.
Yeah.
They're broadcasting loud and clear how they see it, and it's very, very different from the last 4 years with Joe Biden.
When we look at, I suppose, bringing the spiritual component in this, bringing the theology into the public square, I suppose having compassion for the poor is a general principle of Christianity.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean taking what you've got and giving it away to the detriment of your own people and your own family.
Yeah, it's tricky, because we are rich countries, Australia, New Zealand,
Yep.
America. These are rich countries, and so we have a lot of resources to share. The reality is, though, we actually literally cannot feed the world, not unless we're all prepared to drop to a third world lifestyle or emerging world lifestyle ourselves. So while compassion has to be there, people in South America that are essentially economic immigrants to America, it's very, very understandable, and there has to be compassion for it. On the other hand, it will require too much change on the part of Western voters. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen democratically anyway in our countries. It may happen extra democratically, but it's not going to happen democratically. People will not take enough of a haircut to supply the world with our lifestyle. It's just not going to happen.
Some people would say, hey, that's just being selfish, and a Christian worldview would say, hey, you take your coat off, you give it to your brother, you do the Good Samaritan thing in that regard. And also, I suppose, there's an aspect of history, both for the United States and Australia and New Zealand as well, where our economies have been built on wave after wave of immigrants who come over here with their good work ethics, with their hard ideas, with the melting pot of culture. It is part of what has made America great in the past. Is there a little bit of kind of NIMBYism of saying, well, hey, my ancestors benefited from this, but now we're going to pull the rug?
Yeah, it could be, but I think there's two distinctions. One is, I think the Trump administration makes a really obvious distinction they should make, which is between legal and illegal immigration.
Yeah.
Unregulated immigration is the problem here. I don't think anybody's saying let's not have immigration. Countries have clearly benefited and become stronger and better through immigration. My grandparents were immigrants. I've been to Urquhart Castle in Scotland, mate. There's not a chance in the world you don't descend from folks like that. So you may have once been the owner of a castle.
Wow.
But look, and which makes you the Lord and me just a mere pleb. But look, at the end of the day, that's one distinction that we need to make. I think there's another distinction, though, which is an important one for Christians. I don't think the gospel demands that we love everybody exactly the same. And so people can disagree about that. That is a long-standing view in the church, that you love the people closest to you more, and that is more natural than to try to love someone I don't know in South America. I have a generalized love for that person, compassion on the basis they're a fellow human being, but I'm going to have to, under God, love my family more, and my neighbour who lives down the street more, and my work colleague more. The reality is they're closer to me, and that's not just geographical. That's the reality of my life and my lived experience with them. Loving, I mean, I love, Western liberals, but they do tend to love people in the abstract. No offense to Jacinda Ardern, but she was brilliant at this, talking the 30,000 feet view of compassion. We have to offer compassion direct to one another in actual interface when we deal with each other.
Yep.
Loving someone abstractly who lives in South America as an economic migrant is a hard ask for a voter in, wherever, Bankstown in Sydney or, the middle of Auckland. It's just a hard ask.
Now, talking specifically about, I suppose, who immigration is extended to, because this becomes a big issue. Yes, we're not saying no immigration, but who gets to be let in, and what sort of behaviour bonds are put upon those people. Now, of course, there's still a little bit of a rift across the Tasman Sea about you exporting back all the badly behaved Kiwis, but actually that's the sovereign right of a nation to say, we say yes to these people and no to these other people based on their behaviours. Another recent example in Australia, Craig.
Yeah, so we, just as an example of this problem of immigration, we've just had two nurses, and we've got an anti-Semitism problem that's unbelievable in Australia, but we've had two nurses on a, social media piece talking to an Israeli influencer who indicated, the two nurses in Bankstown Hospital, who are both Muslim, who said basically on video, if we had to deal with an Israeli in the hospital, we would kill them. And one of them, the gentleman involved says, we'll send them to Gehenna, we'll send them to hell, basically, Islamic hell. This has caused absolute panic, of course, in the Jewish community, people wondering, well, did my relative die in the hospital because of these two people? The police are now investigating. They've raided the home of one of these guys. This guy is actually an Afghan refugee. He came as a young boy, was treated very compassionately and care, given great care by Australia. Yet he's brought with him attitudes that don't go with what supposedly modern Australia is about. Modern Australia, it should be a plural democracy where everybody should be welcome, but we can't bring our prior hates with us into that environment. And that seems to be the problem here, is that our open borders policy hasn't actually dealt with the issue of character, and hasn't really dealt with the issue of, are you going to leave behind some of the bad stuff that was part of your journey before in order to embrace what's new? And that's not saying Australia current day is perfect, but you came here because you thought you were going to get a better life. Well, isn't it time to maybe pursue that better life, not old hatreds? And that's the challenge with our immigration situation now. It's been so fast, so loose, that we're encountering social problems we just never had before in Australia. Never had masses of anti-Semitism or violence of the kind we're starting to sort of see and have prospect of.
In terms of, I suppose, a Christian voice in the square, I mean, we started off the conversation by saying, hey, the Pope's got two horses in the game, both in terms of the number of Catholics and both of the fact that he's also from South America. But in terms of the sort of voice that Christians should have in the public square on this one, where do we start, Craig? Because it's a complex area with a diversity of views.
Yeah, well, there are genuine refugees, and I think one of the things we've got to solve is how do you deal with those? And I think Christians have a role to play in that. I mean, we care deeply about genuinely about people in need, and so refugees are people in need. Jesus was a kind of a refugee, if you look at the story properly. We all know all of our Christian forebears, St. Paul, etc., were all marginalised, put in jail, oppressed by the authorities. So we know what it would be like to have to run away from a government, so to speak. So that needs to be looked at really closely. What are genuine refugees? The biggest battle we have, though, is economic refugees, where people just want a better life, and that's totally understandable. But that seems to me the bit that needs to be the regulated migration part. Is it compassionate for a country like New Zealand, say, to say, well, you can come to New Zealand as long as you have $5 million and you can start a business? That might be good for New Zealand, but is that actually compassionate? As Christians, do we give a rubber stamp to that? Do we say people that have $5 million are more worthy to come to New Zealand than a person that has $100 but has a good heart and wants to get on and build a life?
Or if you've got a medical condition, you're off the list because we don't want to overload our health system. I mean, there's some common sense to that, but there's on the other side, some of the compassion is missing.
That's right. So I think it's finding a balance. And I always think Christians, because they err on the side of compassion and love, are going to be a great person to have in the conversation. So from my perspective, Christians need to be part of this conversation. And look, Christians should be helping refugee communities. We had a guy in our church in Auckland who was always helping refugees, Syrian refugees, all sorts of people that came, and just felt like it was part of his mission. He'd been off to Greece on a mission and had worked in a refugee camp there with refugees from Syria. And he had a heart for it. And I think the church should have a heart for that. That's not to say New Zealand can absorb millions of people from around the globe. It clearly can't. And you would also create other race tensions. New Zealand's already got some race tensions. So, do you want to exacerbate that? So it's balancing all of these things. The love and compassion has to be there, but practicality has to be there too.
Yeah. Hey, Craig, appreciate your wisdom, your insight, as always. Thanks so much for being on the program today.
Bless you, my friend. So good to see you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.